Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov. Really huge thank you to Larry Kay and to Joyce Rosenzweig, our music director. I felt like there was extra joy just coming from both of you in such waves. Thank you so much I felt like this was a coronation for our Shabbos queen. So thank you, really. Wow, what to say? Shabbat before the election, a lot to be thinking about, a lot of emotions to hold. I was listening to The podcast the other day, and I heard people referring to themselves as being nauseously optimistic, which I think is or nauseously hopeful, maybe was the word that they used. But I think it's a pretty good term right now because the time right now is so hard, the waiting and the not knowing. We're in this lead up, and is there anything more stressful than not knowing? No. And maybe even worse than not knowing is this haunting sense that we've been here before. We've lived through this before. We've had the rug pulled completely out from under us before. So I know many of us remember 2016, waking up, or some of us having not gone to bed at all. Some of you might have been here. And then that waking up on that dark, dark day post-election, we'd been preparing for a victory party, and instead we were left walking around like zombies, wondering what had happened. So now it feels like we can't even be hopeful, or at least anything more than nauseously hopeful, perhaps, because we already know what can happen. And so we're not just living in the unknown, which is already uncomfortable and scary, but we're being robbed of hope. And we have to walk around with this constant small feeling of dread in our stomachs instead. And of course, in 2020, we had to wait many days before the election was even called, so there was this sense of prolonged dread. So even if nothing else, I am here to say tonight that yes, feeling anxious and uncertain and dread-filled right now is completely normal, and perhaps even expected at this point. I'm at my core a very optimistic person, which I think I've said before, and so I believe, or I want to believe, that there is a very real chance that everything is going to be fine. I'm looking at Lynn. Yes, exactly. However, I want to talk about one major anxiety that I'm feeling, which is about the potential amount of violence that is about to come out of this election, regardless of the results, regardless of what happens on Tuesday. There's a heightened sense of anger and grievance in the world right now. And I don't mean just politically, but generally. It feels like all of us are sitting on top of a little bit more pent-up annoyance and rage, which is just waiting to burst out. And we're all acting on that grievance, on that annoyance. I'm including myself in this. I feel myself getting angry more easily, responding to people with slightly more combativeness, not being able to stop myself. I'm not sure if it's because so many of our interactions these days are with people behind screens and emails and messages, or if it feels like the world is just constantly at a pressure tipping point, and so it's impossible for that feeling not to spill over into our interactions with others. And then there's the very real and realized threat of global anti-Semitism that's been building for quite some time now, but has in the last week, it feels, reached another peak of street slashings and personal attacks, and again, realized violence. We've seen poll workers having to prepare themselves for election day attacks and intimidations, which is pretty terrifying to think about. And then there's constant threats that immigrant communities are facing, and the threats that they have to live under. Haitian Americans, Puerto Ricans, to name just two groups that have been targeted in the last month or so. So it doesn't feel like hyperbole to be worried about those who feel that their extremism is justified and violence boiling over into the streets, impacting us in very real ways in these next few days. So from all this anxiety and uncertainty, I want to enter into our Torah portion this week, into Parshat Noach. And I hope you'll go with me a little bit here because I want to do a little bit of a text study together, at least about the beginning of our Parsha. So this is what we know about Noah heading into the Parsha that is named for him. We know that we can directly trace his lineage to Adam, to the first man. And the Torah says that he is named Noach because this one will provide comfort for us. Yenachamenu. He will comfort us in our dealings. That's what we know about Noach. So we enter into the Parsha knowing that God wants to completely destroy the earth, all except for Noah and his family. And the Parsha tells us, "Vatishchat haaretz lifnei ha'elohim v'timaleh haaretz chamas." The earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with violence, with lawlessness. So what exactly is the lawlessness that the earth was filled with at this point? There's obviously debate among the rabbis about what it could be. Some say it's robbery or thievery, greed, idolatry, murder. But Breshit Rabbati says it means that people were doing wrong, they were sinning, and they meant it. Chotim umitkavnim, the Breshit Rabbati says, they knew what they were doing, and they did it anyways. In other words, they felt justified in their actions. They did wrong knowingly. So this is what it takes for God to decide that the world should start completely over. Everything that came before it destroyed, this level of widespread wrongdoing and violence. So God instructs Noah to build an ark. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make it an ark with compartments and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, its height 30 cubits. Make an opening for daylight in the ark and terminate it within a cubit of the top. Put the entrance to the ark in its side. Make it with a bottom, second, and third decks. So first of all, it sounds like a pretty impressive construction job. It's 3 stories high, it's 300 cubits long, but I'm particularly interested in one of the specific instructions. God says, make an opening for daylight at the top. And here's the words that are used in the Parsha. Tzohar ta'aseh lateva. The word used for daylight here is tzohar. Make it tzohar at the top. It is the only time in the entire Torah that this word is used. So if you haven't heard it before, that's why. So the commentators obviously disagree about what exactly this means. It's either a window to let in daylight from the outside, or it's some kind of magical gemstone that illuminates the ship from inside. Okay, those are the 2 options. Everyone agrees, though, that it's about light in some way. God instructs Noah, even in this time of total darkness and disorientation, that it is important that he make space and room for light, for tzohar, for illumination. Modern commentators say that this disagreement is actually, about whether or not it's a window or a gem, is really about a larger question. Are you getting your light from within, as in the case of the pearl or the stone, or from outside, as in the case of the window? Where do we derive our inner illumination from? One of my favorite commentators to read on the subject, who's a Hasidic rabbi, offers his own interpretation on the subject. He says that the tzohar in the ark is meant to remind us of Shabbat in the week. That by nature, our weeks and days can be full of sadness and challenge, but the obligation from God to build a skylight, a possibility of illumination amidst the darkness, is really the obligation from God that we must make space for Shabbat in our week. It is not a given that just because the 7th day comes, that we will know to set it aside and make it holy, or that we'll be able to participate in the oneg, the delight of Shabbat, which is why we must be reminded to build a space for joy. So, we are now also in a time of great unrest and pent-up anger in the world. And this time, we're not going to be able to start completely from scratch. And I don't think any of us would want that. So what do we do? What do we do when we can't hold on to the hope that we know that it might improve? Let's listen to the instructions given to Noah. Noah, who faced a similar time of unrest and violence, who was also at a time of great uncertainty and only knew that he was preparing for the worst with no idea of what was to come. Here are God's instructions Let's take them and hope that we have what it takes to weather the upcoming storm. 1, we get to work. We build. We make plans. We put our efforts into something much bigger than ourselves. 2, we make ourselves an ark, a safe space within the turmoil, maybe multiple arks, a place to turn off all the craziness of the world and feel protected and at home for a while. I hope that CBST can be one of those arks for you, but wherever it is, find your safe spaces. 3, we make sure we have a tzohar, space and room for illumination and joy. We make time for Shabbat. We make time to come into contact with Torah and learning and deep thoughts and delight. We seek out places that let light in, whether that light comes from within us or without us. We make sure that the ark we're building is not only encased in darkness or terror, we make room for our own tzohar. And finally, number 4, we commit to being bearers of Noach, of comfort and relief to one another. We look towards the storm, the flood of hate and extremism that we are facing, and we turn instead to compassion and consolation and comfort. We try, even in the face of extreme anger, to be sources of kindness and grace. That is the best weapon we have in our power against hate. So let's all commit to at least trying to be sources of nachama, yinachemu, nachamu, nachamu, sources of comfort to each other. Shabbat shalom.